Trump roared for attention, but Obama stole the spotlight with a single calm sentence, whose strength really mattered. The evening was supposed to be routine, a predictable segment of primetime political discourse playing out across countless American living rooms. People were settling in after dinner, flipping through channels, expecting the usual mix of pointed questions and carefully crafted talking points. But what unfolded that night in Milwaukee was far from ordinary. It was a moment that cut through the noise, a flash of political theater so jarring that it pulled the air right out of the room for millions watching at home. Donald Trump, leaning slightly forward in his chair with that familiar look of calculated mischief, tossed out a word that would dominate the nation's headlines within minutes. "Obama's a psycho," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand, his voice laced with casual disdain, his expression halfway between a smirk and a sneer. It was the kind of line designed to provoke, to sting, to stick. For a heartbeat, the entire studio froze. The host, a seasoned interviewer, blinked as if unsure she had heard him correctly. Behind the cameras, a subtle shuffle of discomfort rippled through the crew. This wasn't the standard jab, or even a heated accusation. This was a direct attack on character, something personal, venomous, and designed to wound. The interviewer cleared her throat, regaining her composure. "Mr. Trump, did you just refer to former President Obama as a psycho?" Her voice carried a mixture of shock and the strained politeness of someone trying to steer a runaway train back onto the tracks. Trump didn't flinch. "That's exactly what I said," he replied matter-of-factly. "Everyone knows it. The man isn't normal. He's dangerous." The audience, small and carefully curated for the broadcast, reacted with a strange cocktail of gasps, nervous laughter, and dead silence. Some didn't know whether to applaud his bluntness or recoil at his brazenness. Within moments, the segment was clipped, uploaded, shared, and dissected in real time. Phones buzzed across the country. A viewer in Arizona tweeted, "Did he just call Obama a psycho on live TV?" Another in Pennsylvania posted, "This is beyond outrageous. What did I just watch?" Social media flared like a match to dry leaves. It wasn't just a passing insult. It was a cultural flashpoint. In the control room, producers scrambled, barking orders, cutting segments for immediate syndication. They knew they had captured something explosive, the kind of moment that reshapes an entire week of news coverage. On post-show panels, analysts leaned into the chaos. One commentator shook his head in disbelief. "This isn't politics anymore. This is character assassination." Another, more sympathetic to Trump, countered, "This is Trump being Trump." His supporters don't want politeness. They want raw truth. Across the country, people tuned in not just to watch but to react. In a Dallas sports bar, a group of friends crowded around a phone screen, replaying the clip again and again. "Has he finally gone too far?" one asked, shaking his head. "Or is he just saying what half the country's been thinking?" In Portland, an elderly couple watching the late-night rerun sipped their tea in silence before the wife murmured, "This isn't about policy anymore. It's about respect." Comedians pounced on the clip before the night was over. One late-night host quipped, "Well, that's one way to keep your ratings up. Call your predecessor a psycho during prime time." The audience laughed. But beneath the punchline, a seriousness lingered. By dawn, every major outlet had plastered the words across their headlines. "Trump calls Obama a psycho in live interview." It was the kind of phrase that stuck in people's minds, a spark with the power to ignite a firestorm. And somewhere in a quieter corner of the country, Barack Obama watched the clip himself. Those who know him well would later say his expression barely changed. He leaned back slightly, drew a slow breath, and said almost to himself, "So, that's where we are now." But the real story was just beginning. For while Trump believed he had landed a devastating blow, a headline-grabbing, conversation-dominating strike, Obama was quietly setting the stage for something far more enduring. He didn't rush to cameras. He didn't issue a hasty statement. He did what he's always done best. He paused, calculated, and waited. By the next morning, the clip was everywhere. Breakfast tables in Ohio, break rooms in Texas, subway rides in New York. Hashtags like #Trump calls Obama psycho and #presidential respect were trending before sunrise. On CNN, anchors replayed the moment with thinly veiled incredulity. "This isn't standard political discourse," one said sternly. "We're talking about a former president being called a psycho on live television." Over on Fox News, the tone was more divided. One guest said, "He's just saying what people feel. He cuts through the nonsense." But even there, another voice interjected. There's a line between critiquing policy and questioning someone's sanity. The divide was not just political. It was generational, cultural, visceral. In a diner in Idaho, two men argued over their breakfast plates. Finally, "Someone's calling it like it is," one said, jabbing his fork at his eggs. "That's leadership." The other shook his head slowly. "That's not leadership. That's the language of a schoolyard bully." In Los Angeles, a group of college students huddled around a laptop before class, pausing the clip at the interviewer's stunned face. "This is exactly the problem," one muttered. "We've normalized cheap insults instead of demanding real answers." Politicians rushed to their microphones, each weighing the cost of silence. A Republican senator from Nebraska praised Trump's bluntness. "At least he doesn't sugarcoat." Maybe that's what this country needs. Plain talk. A Democratic congresswoman from Minnesota shot back on social media. "Policy disagreements are fair game. Calling your predecessor a psycho isn't strength. It's cowardice dressed up as courage." And yet, through all the noise, Obama said nothing. His absence from the conversation was not born of fear. It was strategy. Those close to him recognized it immediately. Marcus Hilliard, one of his longest-serving aides, sipped his morning coffee in D.C. and shook his head. "Psycho? Really? That's the level now?" His wife, Denise, glanced over from the kitchen counter. "You knew it was coming. He's running out of material." Valerie Jarrett, texting Marcus from Chicago, was less amused. "He'll ignore it. He always does. But should he this time?" Meanwhile, Michelle Obama, caught by reporters leaving an education event in Baltimore, offered a single, sharp sentence. "I think words say more about the person using them than the person they're aimed at." She didn't stop walking. She didn't elaborate. And yet, her remarks spread like wildfire, echoing across news cycles with the same intensity as Trump's original slur. Inside the Obama household, the conversation was more personal. Sasha scrolled through her phone and shook her head. "He's trending again because of this? Seriously?" Malia, leaning against the arm of the couch, added, "You're not just going to let that slide, are you?" Obama, teacup in hand, smiled faintly. "Respect isn't about reacting to every insult," he said quietly. "It's about choosing your moment." His advisors, however, were less serene. Over lunch near DuPont Circle, Marcus, Valerie, and David Plouffe huddled together, their voices low. "He's baiting you," Plouffe said flatly. "That's the play. He wants a reaction." Valerie frowned. "I don't know. This one feels different. People are watching. They're waiting." Marcus tapped the table. "Then he has to respond. Not for Trump, for the country. If this kind of talk becomes normal, we've already lost." Obama, when Valerie finally called him that evening, listened quietly. "I hear you," he said after a pause. "But if I respond, it can't just be about defending myself. It has to mean something bigger." Michelle, overhearing from the doorway, shook her head with a mixture of exasperation and admiration. "You always take the long road," she murmured. "The long road lasts longer," he replied. As days passed, speculation became its own form of theater. Every public appearance, every speech, every handshake was scrutinized for clues. Would he break his silence with a fiery rebuttal? A clever joke? Or a solemn statement about the state of the nation's discourse? Cable networks aired montages of his past moments of composure, framing the narrative as a study in contrasts. One man throwing barbs, the other holding his tongue. Even those outside his political circle began to weigh in. A conservative columnist wrote, "You don't need to be an Obama supporter to see that calling him a psycho is reckless. If that's where the bar is set, nobody's safe from this brand of politics." On talk radio, callers vented their frustration. "I don't care what side you're on," one listener said in St. Louis. "You don't call a former president a psycho on national television. That's not debate. It's degradation." And yet, Obama waited. Crowds leaned in every time he spoke, wondering if this would be the moment. It never was. He spoke about healthcare, about education, about community building, everything but the insult. And the longer he stayed silent, the more people hung on his next word. Trump, true to form, saw the growing storm not as a warning but as fuel. 3 days after the Milwaukee interview, He stepped onto a rally stage in Iowa, greeted by a sea of red hats and roaring applause. Midway through his speech, he couldn't resist. "You saw what I said on TV, right?" He grinned. "I called Obama a psycho." The crowd erupted. Cheers, whistles, a few uneasy glances. "And I'm not taking it back," Trump added, jabbing a finger into the air. "He's worse than that. He's been fooling this country for years, and everybody knows it." The cameras rolled. Reporters scribbled. Outside, a handful of protesters held up handmade signs. "Words matter. Respect the office." Inside, the chant swelled. "Psycho! Psycho!" Some in the crowd grinned. Others crossed their arms. Back in Chicago, Obama sat at his dining table that night, the ticking clock filling the silence. "They want me to hit back," he said finally. Michelle looked at him steadily. "No," she said softly. "They want leadership. There's a difference." And so, the waiting continued. The insult had been thrown like a stone into a still pond, and the ripples spread through coffee shops, classrooms, late-night monologues, and international headlines. Europe shook its head at the spectacle. Asian newspapers asked bluntly, "Is this the tone of American leadership now?" But beneath the noise, one truth lingered. The next move wasn't Trump's. It belonged to Obama. And when he finally chose to speak, the entire nation would be listening. The tension had not cooled. In fact, it was only growing more intense. On Fox News, a panelist chuckled with a mix of admiration and dismissal. "This is vintage Trump," he said with an air of certainty. "He's not retreating, not softening his stance. He says what's on his mind. And that's exactly why his supporters rally behind him." The remark drew nods from some. But even within that studio, there was a flicker of unease. Trump's choice to double down on his incendiary statement was creating ripples that would become waves before the next sunrise. In Salt Lake City, 2 construction workers sat on overturned crates during lunch, unwrapping sandwiches as they replayed the clip on a phone screen smeared with dust. "He's telling it like it is," one said, chewing with the conviction of a man who had rehearsed the line in his head for years. "Obama never did this country any favors. Calling him a psycho just says what plenty of us already believe." His coworker shook his head, wiping mustard from his fingers. "You can hate his policies without calling him insane. That's not truth. That's recklessness. And what message does that send to our kids watching this circus?" The debate wasn't confined to politics. It spilled into culture, late-night comedy, and even classrooms. On The Daily Show, the host grinned wryly. "If Obama's a psycho," he said to a roaring audience, "then what does that make Trump? A blackjack player betting America's dignity on a double down." The joke landed, the laughter rolled. But when the applause faded, the unease lingered. Beneath the punchlines, the stakes were clear. In Chicago, the people who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with Barack Obama watched the spectacle unfold with a mix of anger and restraint. Marcus Hilliard, one of his longtime aides, gripped his phone as he spoke to Valerie Jarrett. "He's trying to drag Barack through the mud," Marcus muttered. "It's a trap. Outrage is the bait." Valerie's voice came steady on the other end. "Barack knows that. The challenge isn't whether to respond. It's how to respond without lowering himself to the same level." At home, the conversation was more blunt. Sasha crossed her arms, her tone sharp. "He's really going to keep doing this? Again?" Malia, seated on the couch, shook her head. "It's desperate. He wants attention, and he's getting it." Michelle Obama, perched nearby with a cup of tea, glanced at her husband. "Barack, people are starting to wonder if your silence means you're avoiding it. He's writing a story, and you're not part of it yet." Obama leaned back, fingers laced. "Let him write his story," he said with the quiet confidence of someone thinking 10 moves ahead. "Mine will last longer." But even his allies sensed the clock ticking. Patience was a virtue, until it started to look like absence. And the public mood was shifting from curiosity to demand. Cable producers, political strategists, and everyday voters alike wanted to know, when would Barack Obama speak? What would he say? The first whisper of his next move came not as a dramatic announcement, but as a small line buried in a press advisory. Barack Obama would headline a leadership forum in Milwaukee the following week. No promises of a response. No mention of Trump. Just a scheduled line. And yet, that single sentence set the media machinery ablaze. Panels speculated. Columnists guessed. Hashtags sprouted like weeds. Would this be the moment? Would he strike back? Could he turn a personal slight into a national lesson? Inside his Chicago home office, Obama prepared, not with fury, but with deliberation. A yellow legal pad rested before him, half covered in his neat handwriting. He tapped the pen against the margin, lost in thought. Unlike Trump, who thrived in the improvisational chaos of live confrontation, Obama worked like a craftsman, chiseling, refining, distilling. He wasn't writing a counterattack. He was building a message that would outlive the insult. David Plouffe, his longtime strategist, called that evening. "Barack," he said, voice tense with the urgency of a man who had survived too many campaign storms. "You don't need to say his name. In fact, it might be more powerful if you don't. But you do need to shape this moment. People are looking for someone to set a standard." Obama leaned back in his chair. "Guidance isn't throwing a rock back at someone who threw one at you, David. It's showing them there's another road." Halfway through the call, Michelle appeared in the doorway with a stack of mail. "Still working on the speech?" she asked. He gave a faint smile. "Not a speech," he corrected. "A message." Later that night, the house settled into its soft evening quiet. Sasha padded in wearing socks, Malia trailing behind her. "You're going to respond, right?" Malia asked, half serious, half expectant. Obama raised an eyebrow. "Why do you think that?" "Because you always tell us leadership means speaking up when it matters," Sasha chimed in. "And this matters." Their words lingered after they left, echoing faintly as he scribbled. Leadership is not about mirroring insults. It is about rising higher than them. The next morning, his advisors gathered in a modest office downtown. Valerie Jarrett opened the meeting with a question that hung heavy in the air. Do we acknowledge the word he used, or do we bury it? Silence followed. Marcus broke it. Acknowledge it, without repeating it. The word is already out there. Don't give it oxygen. Redirect the light. Obama, at the head of the table, listened more than he spoke. His stillness had a way of steadying the room. Finally, he leaned forward. People expect outrage. They expect me to swing back. But outrage doesn't win hearts. Clarity does. They drafted. They edited. They argued over phrasing. Themes emerged. Respect. The weight of language. The culture words create. One draft leaned too academic. "No," Obama said, shaking his head. "This isn't a lecture. It's a kitchen table talk." Outside, the whispers grew louder. Comedians teased the suspense. Obama's silence is the slowest mic drop in history. One late-night host joked. But beneath the humor, people were waiting. Students, veterans, business owners, parents. In Milwaukee, the forum sold out in record time. A high school teacher told her students she planned to live stream it in class. A Kansas City bar owner posted Obama's speech on the big screen. Come watch history. Obama kept refining. In private, he tested lines on Michelle, gauging her reaction with a glance. One passage about character being measured not by the names you call, but by the bridges you build, made her smile. "That's the one," she said softly. On the night before the forum, he closed a notebook, crossed out 2 paragraphs, circled 3 phrases, and murmured to himself, patience, precision, purpose. The morning arrived crisp and restless. Downtown Milwaukee was buzzing. Streets blocked not for security fears, but because of the sheer number of people clustering near the theater. Those without tickets held phones aloft, hoping for a glimpse. Inside, the air thrummed with anticipation. Reporters adjusted tripods, tested mics, whispered predictions. Would this be the rebuke or the reset? Backstage, Obama was the calmest man in the building, dressed in a simple Navy suit. No tie. He asked a young organizer about their mentorship program, as though there wasn't a political storm raging outside. That ability, to center others when the spotlight was blinding, was something even his critics begrudgingly respected. Michelle sat a few rows from the front, her posture composed but her gaze intent. She had been here before. She knew the weight that could ride on a single sentence. When the announcer introduced him, the hall erupted. Obama walked with his signature unhurried stride, shaking a few hands before placing his fingers lightly on the podium. "Thank you. Thank you. Please have a seat. We've got some work to do tonight." He began, as he so often did, with a story. When I was in college, a professor told me something I've never forgotten. He said, voice steady but carrying. Your character isn't tested when things are easy. It's tested when you're under fire. That stuck with me, because life hands out a lot of fire. A soft laugh from the audience. From there, he wove into the forum's stated theme: leadership, civic responsibility, the weight of language. Words matter, he said firmly. They can heal. They can guide. They can ignite movements. But words can also wound. They can divide. They can drag a whole culture into the mud if we let them. People leaned in. They knew where this was going. Obama paused, letting the silence build. Now, some of you may have seen a certain comment made about me on television last week. Laughter rippled. He gave a faint smile. I won't repeat it. You already know it. But I will say this. When someone chooses insults over ideas, it says more about them than about the person they're talking about. The applause that followed was immediate, swelling, cathartic. He waited, patient, unshaken. Leadership, he continued, isn't about tearing someone down so people notice you. It's about lifting people up, even when nobody is clapping. Reporters in the press section exchanged glances. That's the quote. One mouthed. A college student in the balcony whispered. That's the hit back. But better. He went further. This isn't about me. I've been called a lot of things in my life, and I'm still standing. What matters is the message we send the next generation. What do they learn when leaders treat the public stage like a schoolyard? Are we teaching them how to solve problems or how to sling names? Michelle smiled from her seat. He hadn't defended himself. He had reframed the entire insult into a national lesson. Then came the moment everyone would remember. Obama adjusted the microphone, leaned forward just slightly, and let the room still itself. You know, he said, when somebody calls you crazy, unstable, or whatever label they think sticks, the easiest thing in the world is to fire back. Well, you're worse. That's easy. That's playground stuff. But we're not here to run a country like a playground. Laughter, but tinged with relief, because everyone knew exactly who he meant, even without the name. And then the line that would echo for days. Real leadership isn't about proving who can shout the loudest in the room. Real leadership is proving you don't have to. The theater erupted. The applause was deafening, rolling like thunder, rising to a standing ovation that seemed to last longer than the pause before it. Michelle crossed her arms and smiled faintly, pride softening her expression. Clips of that sentence were on social media before he left the stage. Memes, tweets, posts, headlines. Obama responds without responding. CNN called it a masterclass in restraint. MSNBC labeled it the rebuttal without the brawl. Even on Fox, one skeptical panelist admitted, you don't have to agree with his politics to admit. That was powerful. In homes across America, people watched and nodded. A teacher in New Mexico texted her colleague, tomorrow's lesson plan. This clip. A father in Oregon nudged his teenage son and said, that's how you deal with disrespect, without losing yourself. Obama didn't need to shout. He didn't even need to mention the word. In not stooping, he stood taller. And in doing so, he turned what began as an insult into a case study in composure, turning down the volume while turning up the standard. By the next morning, the country was still buzzing, not about the word that started it, but about the way he ended it. He appeared diminished without his name even being spoken, and that in itself was striking. One man scoffed at the idea, waving it off with a smirk. That's just polished rhetoric, he muttered. But a woman sitting nearby disagreed. Sometimes polished words are the very thing that cut through all the shouting, she replied. The moment from the Milwaukee Forum began to ripple outward like a stone hitting still water. Within hours, snippets of Obama's calm but cutting remarks were everywhere, on TikTok, on Instagram Reels, on Twitter feeds. Short clips set to stirring soundtracks went viral. One caption read, this is how you respond with grace and still make it sting, and it amassed over 2 million views in less than a day. Comedians couldn't resist the contrast either. Stephen Colbert, with his trademark smirk, told his audience, Trump yells, Obama speaks softly, and somehow the soft voice carries further. The crowd erupted with knowing laughter, the kind that comes when the truth is too obvious to ignore. Even international media picked up on the disparity in tone. The Guardian ran a headline, Obama answers Trump's jab with a lesson in leadership, a Canadian columnist remarked. In a single sentence, Obama reminded the world why his words still echo. For Donald Trump, the aftermath was layered and messy. His loyal base reveled in the fact that he had drawn Obama out, prompting a public response. At a rally in Florida, his supporters cheered as he mocked the former president's composed delivery, exaggerating slow pauses as he jeered. He talks like that because he's got nothing real to say. Laughter and applause filled the arena. But outside that echo chamber, the reaction was different. Headlines told a more complicated story. The Los Angeles Times framed it bluntly. Loud versus calm. Two competing images of strength. Behind closed doors, Trump's advisors were divided. Some urged him to keep going, to ramp up the attacks and stay on offense. Others cautioned that Obama had flipped the dynamic, turning insults into a platform for dignity. "You're starting to look frantic," one aide reportedly warned. Trump brushed it aside. "Doesn't matter. My people love it." But by week's end, the data whispered a different truth. Polls showed Obama's favorability climbing a few points among independents. In states like Michigan and Wisconsin, focus groups described his response as steady, presidential, and even refreshing. Quietly, even a few conservatives admitted that the moment had landed with impact. In Cleveland, a pastor spoke to his congregation during a community discussion. "You don't need to agree with every policy Obama ever passed to see that he handled that moment right. He showed that you can meet hostility without feeding it. And that's the lesson here." Across the country, the media dissected every frame, every pause, every carefully chosen word. Podcasts debated whether his reaction had been spontaneous or calculated. Opinion writers speculated whether this signaled a new chapter in his public role. And as for Trump, he began to look less like a commander holding the stage and more like a man shouting at passing clouds. But the deeper current flowing beneath all this noise wasn't just about politics. It was about the principle. Days after the Milwaukee Forum, something unexpected unfolded. The chatter didn't just dissolve into the usual cycle of outrage. It evolved into reflection. People weren't only talking about what Trump had said anymore. They were discussing the way Obama had chosen to respond and what that revealed about leadership. In a Kansas City library, a high school debate club watched the clip projected on a white wall. Obama's words played. "True leadership is never about proving who can yell the loudest. It's about proving you don't need to." When it ended, the room fell silent until one student raised her hand. "That's the difference between power and strength," she said. Heads nodded. Even among those too young to vote, the point was not lost. In a Memphis church basement, a pastor wove that same quote into his sermon. "The easy thing is to shout back. The harder thing, the stronger thing, is to stay steady." The congregation murmured in agreement. Commentators called it classic Obama. Restrained, deliberate, yet quietly devastating. Others said it was more than nostalgia. It was a reminder of how far public discourse had slid. Even conservative talk hosts who rarely gave him credit admitted, "I'll hand it to him. He didn't take the bait." And that's rare these days. What resonated most was how familiar the situation felt. Everyone had been there. Provoked, mocked, baited, whether at work, in a classroom, or at the dinner table. The instinct to lash out is universal. Obama had modeled another path, and people noticed. In Des Moines, a mother told her daughter over dinner, "See that? That's how you deal with bullies. You don't mirror them. You rise above them." In Portland, a father said to his coworkers, "I wanted my kid to see what staying composed under pressure really looks like." Meanwhile, Trump kept swinging. He posted furiously, repeated the insult at rallies, and tried to reclaim the spotlight. But the more he yelled, the more the moment slipped from his grasp. Each outburst only threw more light on the calm contrast that had already been set. Obama, for his part, issued no victory lap. He didn't gloat or release follow-ups. He returned quietly to his work, mentorship events, civic projects, community outreach. His silence after the response gave it even more weight. It said, "I've spoken. Now I'll move forward." And the country, for at least a fleeting moment, seemed to follow his lead. By the month's end, the numbers reflected it. Obama's approval ticked upward across party lines. Trump slipped among independents. But the statistics were just shadows of something deeper. Conversations had shifted, not just about who was winning, but about what kind of leadership people wanted. In Milwaukee, a muralist began painting Obama at a podium, hand raised. The words "real leadership" stretched across the brick wall above him. Pastors snapped photos, posted them online, and wrote captions not about the insult, but about the reminder. Words matter. Restraint matters. Dignity still has power. In the end, what stayed with people wasn't the insult hurled in the heat of a rally. It was the lesson delivered in calm, deliberate tones. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And in a time of constant noise, the whisper was what people remembered.